There's a certain kind of person who can imagine an entire future in their head. A future where everything is different, where the business finally works, where the ideas become real, where the version of themselves they picture so clearly finally shows up in the world. You can see it so vividly, sometimes it almost feels like a memory instead of a dream. You think about it while lying in bed, while staring at the ceiling, while walking somewhere with headphones on and your mind drifting far away from where your body actually is. In those moments, something inside you feels electric, like you're meant for more, like your life is supposed to unfold in a way that most people around you can't even imagine. But then the next day comes, and something strange happens. The same person who can imagine a huge future struggles to start small things. The same person who dreams about building something meaningful delays sending a simple email. The same person who talks passionately about what they want from life sometimes spends hours doing nothing that actually moves them forward. And if you've ever experienced that contradiction, you probably know the quiet frustration that comes with it. Because from the outside, people have a very simple explanation. They say you're lazy. They say you lack discipline. They say if you really wanted something badly enough, you would just do it. But that explanation has always been too shallow. Because the strange thing is, genuinely lazy people usually don't spend much time thinking about big futures. They don't feel restless when nothing is happening. They don't lie awake at night imagining different versions of their life. And they definitely don't feel the quiet guilt that appears when another day passes without progress. The people who experience this pattern often care deeply, sometimes too deeply. And that's where things begin to get interesting. Because there's a certain psychological pattern that shows up in people who appear ambitious in their imagination, but inconsistent in their action. And most people misunderstand it completely. They call it laziness. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as high cognitive simulation. It simply means the brain spends a lot of time mentally rehearsing possibilities. Some research in cognitive psychology shows that people who engage heavily in mental simulation often feel emotionally connected to outcomes before those outcomes exist. In other words, the brain experiences a version of the future before the body ever moves toward it. That can feel inspiring, but it can also create an invisible trap. Because when the brain repeatedly imagines success, the nervous system can experience a small release of reward chemicals. Not the full reward, but a preview, a hint. Something close enough that the brain registers as partial progress. This is why sometimes imagining a future can feel surprisingly satisfying. You picture yourself finishing something important. You imagine the reaction people might have. You picture how your life will look when everything changes, and for a moment, it feels real. But the strange consequence of this is that the brain sometimes receives emotional closure before the work even begins, which makes starting the work feel heavier than it should. Neuroscientists who study motivation often talk about dopamine not as the reward chemical, but as the movement chemical. It rises when the brain senses progress towards something meaningful. But if the brain experiences too much simulated progress in imagination, the motivation to physically move toward the goal can become weaker. It's not that the desire disappears, it's that the urgency fades. The vision exists, but the first step feels strangely distant. And when someone lives with that pattern long enough, people around them start forming conclusions. They say things like, "You talk a lot but never do anything," or "You have potential but you waste it." Sometimes those words are said casually, and over time, those messages start forming a quiet identity. The person begins to believe that something inside them is fundamentally flawed. But in many cases, the pattern didn't start with laziness at all. It started much earlier, often in environments where imagination became a place of safety. Many people who carry strong ambition mixed with inaction grew up in environments where dreaming was easier than acting. Maybe they were praised for ideas more than effort.
Maybe they were told they were gifted, intelligent, or meant for big things, but never taught how slow progress actually works. Or maybe the opposite happened. Maybe their environment felt unpredictable. Maybe mistakes were punished harshly. Maybe success felt fragile. In environments like that, the brain learns something subtle. It learns that thinking about a future is safe, but attempting it carries risk, embarrassment, failure, criticism, disappointment. So the nervous system adapts. It keeps the dream alive, but it hesitates when it comes time to move. And from the outside, that hesitation looks like laziness, but inside, it's often protection. Protection from confirming a fear that quietly lives underneath ambition. The fear that maybe the imagined version of yourself isn't possible. And as strange as it sounds, the mind sometimes prefers an unfinished dream over a failed attempt, because an unfinished dream still contains possibility. Once you try and fail, the dream becomes specific, measured, real, and reality can feel heavier than imagination. Behavioral psychologists sometimes refer to this as self-handicapping, a pattern where the mind unconsciously delays effort in order to protect identity. If you never fully try, failure can never fully define you. It's not a conscious strategy.
Most people experiencing it don't even realize it's happening. They just feel a strange resistance when it's time to begin. And then they judge themselves for that resistance. But this pattern isn't rare. In fact, it often appears in people who feel deeply connected to their potential. People who sense that their life could become something meaningful, but haven't yet developed the internal structure to translate vision into consistent action. And that brings up something important. This pattern isn't better than other ways of being, and it isn't worse either. Some people are naturally oriented towards steady action. They focus on the next step. They move forward slowly but consistently. Their strength is momentum. Other people are oriented toward vision. They see possibilities others overlook. Their mind explores paths before anyone else even notices them. Their strength is imagination. Both types of people exist in every creative, scientific, and entrepreneurial field. The world needs both. But the tension appears when someone carries the visionary mind without yet learning the discipline of gradual movement. That's where the internal conflict begins. You can see the destination clearly, but the road feels strangely foggy. And the more time passes, the more that gap between vision and action becomes emotionally heavy. But here's where the story becomes more complicated. Because the same mind that struggles with consistent action often carries another hidden trait. It notices patterns quickly. It absorbs information deeply. It can imagine solutions before problems fully form. In psychology, this tendency is sometimes linked with divergent thinking, the ability to generate multiple ideas rapidly. And while that ability can create distraction, it's also strongly connected to creativity. Many highly creative people experience periods of intense productivity followed by periods of stillness, not because they lack ambition, but because their mind moves in cycles: expansion, then hesitation; vision, then reflection; creation, then recovery. This rhythm can look confusing from the outside, especially in a culture that celebrates constant productivity. But human motivation has never been perfectly linear. Even the brain itself moves in rhythms. Attention rises and falls. Energy fluctuates. Interest shifts. And for people with particularly active minds, those fluctuations can be even more noticeable. But there's also a quieter cost hidden inside this pattern. Because when someone repeatedly sees their potential but struggles to act on it, a certain type of frustration builds slowly. Not loud frustration, the quiet kind. The kind that appears when you look back at time passing, weeks, months, years, and you start wondering what your life might have looked like if movement had matched imagination. That question can be heavy, but it also contains something important. Because the moment someone becomes aware of this pattern without judging themselves for it, something shifts. The mind stops fighting itself. Instead of saying, "I'm lazy," the question becomes different. What is my brain trying to protect me from? What am I afraid will happen if I truly begin? Sometimes the answer is failure. Sometimes it's success. Success can be surprisingly intimidating because success changes identity. It brings attention, expectation, responsibility, and the brain often prefers familiar discomfort over unfamiliar pressure. So, delaying action becomes a way to stay in a psychological middle ground, still full of potential but not yet exposed to the weight of reality. Understanding this doesn't magically solve the pattern, but it removes something important: shame. And shame is one of the biggest barriers to movement. When people believe something is wrong with them, they stop exploring themselves with curiosity. They only criticize. But curiosity creates space. It allows someone to notice their own mind instead of fighting it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.